and people would drop by, and there was kind of an interesting group, and they all rode motorcycles. Mom and Dad both rode motorcycles, called the Moraga Spit and Polish Club, and it was named after Moraga, which is a street in Bel Air, and Howard Hawks and Victor Fleming and Walter Lang all lived on Moraga, and they all rode motorcycles, and they'd come over the Sepulveda Pass to Van Nuys and gather at our place, and people would come from different directions. And someone was writing an article on Victor Fleming, and they understood that, he rode on a motorcycle and there was this group, but they can't find any pictures. And there's one picture of my mom and dad on motorcycles, but everybody who was there and the actors and so forth were all in their contracts. They would not fly and they would not ride motorcycles because they were basically chattel to the studio that they were under contract to, and you can't make movies if you've been busted up on a motorcycle or in an airplane. And so there are no photographs of this group. And they would come through, and it was Robert Taylor, and he was married to Barbara Stanwyck at the time. She was a ride behind. And, then Bill Wellman, the director, and his wife Dottie. And Dottie and my mother were the only two that rode their own motorcycles, and Keenan Wind, et cetera. And Roy was a great friend of Dad's, and later on I'd gone hunting with Roy, but it was interesting because we had the farm. We actually butcher our own animals, and we would go out in this big walk-in cooler that we had. There would be 2-3 bears hung in it, and Dad would say, "Oh, Jesus, Roy's been up shooting bear in Fraser Park again," and he'd come by, and they would hang the dressed out bear in our cooler till they could come back, pick him up, and take him to the Union Ice House, and that deal. So they were around, and you're not really aware of it until you start telling stories, and you went, yeah, they were real. They were around, and my dad was a great friend of Lou Ayres. The picture that got my dad signed to contract at Universal was one called Spirit of Notre Dame, and it was the picture that Knute Rockne was coming out to work as a technical advisor. The plane crashed and he died. Anyway, Lou and Dad were great friends, and he was married to Ginger Rogers at the time. So Ginger Rogers became my godmother. And I didn't really see her that much, but I would get cards and so forth as I went through school. And so it was more of a communication by letter and so forth. And I would see her on occasion, and she would remember me to the folks and so forth.
Now, were you the oldest?
I'm the oldest, and I have a brother, Dennis, who's now living in Tennessee. He's a builder. And we both kind of dabbled in the picture business, but then basically had no talent to speak of, and we went on into business instead of into the business. But Denny made, a picture, the Lafayette Esquadrille, which was a picture that Bill Wellman did, really the story of his life when he flew with the Lafayette Flying Corps, and Clint Eastwood was just starting out, and he was in it. David Jansen was just starting out, and he was in it. Along with a lot of sons of, I think Mitchum's Young Kid was in it, and Billy Wellman was in it, and but they were all played the part of the young pilots. So anyway, we went to school, and
Now, your father was a pilot. Can you tell us about that?
Yeah. Well, Dad flew and actually was taking lessons, and he soloed on December 6, 1941, and my mother was getting ready to solo Sunday, December 7th, 1941, and they were on the line on the tarmac when the Van Nuys, 27 West or whatever, it got shut down, and the war was on, and Mother never soloed. Later on, at the end of the war, my dad, or after the war, my dad went into partners with a fellow by the name of Dick Probert, and they formed Probert Devine Aviation, and they had a flying school at Whiteman Air Park, and we had 26 airplanes and 17 instructors, and they then ran a fixed base operation there and school, but it hadn't developed to the situation it is today. And then they owned the Big Bear Airport, and and had that was where people would fly to on their cross country. So they were pretty much involved in aviation, and had a lot of great pals in there.
Now, who was John Myers?
John Myers. John Myers was Dad's first attorney, and I have known John Myers my entire life. I really got to know him as kind of an adult, really, the past 20 years, where we were campmates together in the Bohemian Club in Los Angeles camp. But John had finished from Stanford to Harvard Law School, and then he was in New York for a period of time. And my dad was a great friend of Bing Crosby. And Bing Crosby introduced my dad to Jack O'Melveny, who was part of the prestigious law firm of O'Melveny and Myers in Los Angeles. I think old Superior Court Justice Lou Myers retired from the bench, but came and formed a partnership with I think it was Henry O'Melveny, and then Jack was Henry's son. And the firm was there, but Jack felt that there was a potential business in the entertainment industry, and he was Bing's personal attorney. And Bing introduced Jack to Dad, and they became very good friends. And when John Myers came back from New York, they made him the lead attorney when they were going to set up the office in Hollywood. And I remember driving by the office site at the old, it's like Columbia Square or something like that, where the crossroads of the world. He said, that's John's first office right there, where he and Lucia, worked out of there. Or no, I guess he hadn't married Lucia at that time. But anyway, so John was around. They became great friends. And then John left the legal business. Well, relatively, he went to work for Lockheed and as general counsel, but got to fly airplanes along with it. So when at the end of the war, he was working both, I guess, for Lockheed and Northrop at the time. And I kind of got these stories afterwards when I got to know him later. And they said, well, you come back to Melveny and Myers. He said, no, I'm having too much fun flying airplanes. So that became his deal. But Dad and the family were always close to John. And at the kind of end of the war and kind of growing up, we would go up and visit. We had a place in Big Bear, the airport, and we also had a house up there. But we'd go visit John down at his place at China Cove. And it was always, as a little kid, it was great fun to go out riding in John's speedboat, Hell's Bells. And it was the fastest boat on the lake. And he was just kind of always around. And then, later on, and, always kind of close, great stories. And aviation was a big part of it. And so that was it was a great friendship they had, and it went up to the time my dad passed away in '77, and I had when I was at Van Nuys, I guess I was a sixth grader, and I was over at one of my classmates. I think it was seventh, eighth grade or whatever. It was Carol Stillwell, and her uncle Charlie Stillwell ran the rental boat operation really at Big Bear. And he always claimed that he had the fastest boat. Miss Big Bear was this great Chris Craft. And I happened to be at the Stillwells, and he was there, and he said, your friend John Myers is going to break me. He said, I'm trying to, Miss Big Bear is the fastest boat on the lake, and every time I get it tuned up, Myers comes up, and he's faster, and then I got to put more money in it to get mine faster, and I'm going to run out of money before Myers does. Anyway, so that was kind of a great deal. And then another kind of thing, a story that came through was that when Jack, when they were putting the office together, and Jack, he said, John, he says, I just interviewed a gal, Phi Beta Kappa, et cetera, like that, and a good looker, and I'm going to have her help you keep the Hollywood office running together. And he said, if you're as smart as I think you are, you'll marry her. And that was Lucia, and they did get married, and a great gal. Son Lou was also a member of our camp until he passed away. But just John is one of those great guys, and it's hard to put together all the little pearls of wisdom that were just common sense that would kind of come out as you kind of sit around under a tree and have a beer or have a see-through. His crystal yum yum, as he referred to them.